Well, hello, and welcome back to That Girl's Quilting Threads and Things. My name's Diana, and I try to share with you, the viewer, tips and tricks that hopefully will make your quilting journey just a little bit easier. So whether you're a returning viewer or a new viewer, thank you so much for choosing to watch this video. Today's project is a quilt called Dawn's Goose. I found this pattern in a magazine series called The Patchwork Place in the Big Book of Fat Quarter Quilts. So this quilt was originally designed and pieced by Jean Large and Shelley Wicks. I won't be able to give you all of the exact sizes, but you can get the measurements from the pattern inside the book. It was published in 2016 by Martingale, and it was published in a neighboring backyard of mine, Bothell, Washington. So today's quilt, what I really like about it, the pattern is based off of one block. Not only is this quilt fat quarter friendly, but it's also very, very scrappy friendly. I thought I would play around a little with the color scheme, so the quilt that we're making today is not exactly going to look like Dawn's quilt. And what I like about that is when you do find a pattern that you like, playing with a color scheme can also have a big change on the outcome of the quilt itself. So join me at the cutting table and let's get started on this quilt block. I warn you though, this quilt has 144 flying geese that make up 48 blocks for this quilt. So to start the quilt block, you're going to be building flying geese unit. The total flying geese unit count is 144, and you're going to be building 48 blocks using those 144 flying geese. You can do your flying geese unit either one at a time or four at a time. What I did is I tried the one at a time method. I took my goose unit here, that's your long rectangle. I would put my sky piece right on my goose unit, and I would draw two lines because I'm trying to learn how to minimize waste. So this is a big enough unit that if I sew a secondary line, once I've peeled that back and cut the extra off, I get bonus scraps that I can use either finishing this project or on another project. And then once I sewed my two lines, I would go ahead and peel this open and press it back so that I had half my sky. And I would follow the same process with another piece of fabric, just like this. And I would draw my two lines, one diagonal corner to corner, and a secondary one 1/2 inch away towards the outside so that I get that bonus half square triangle. All right, so once you've built your flying geese, you're going to use 3 flying geese per block. So now that I have my flying geese units, I'm going to take and put 3 of them together, and I'm going to put them out straight, and then I'm going to attach them just like that, making sure that they line up, and I'll sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance for the top flying goose. And then I'll do the same thing for the bottom flying goose. And once you have your flying geese put together, you should end up with a unit that looks similar to that. Pressing is quilter's choice as always. I did experiment pressing these seams open to help reduce the bulk. The majority of the blocks I've found that the fabric actually laid easier just by going towards the tip of the flying goose, the peak. All right, but again, it's quilter's choice, what works best for you. So once you have your 3 flying geese units together, the next thing that you want to do is attach your top triangles. Since I did my flying geese in 2 color waves, I have a green and a blue. I built 24 blocks in the green, and I built 24 blocks in the blue color wave. Once you have put your 3 flying geese together. You're going to need a 4-inch square, and you cut that square in half on the diagonal. And that's what's going to give you the top piece. So it's going to look something like that. And then for the bottom, on the green, I chose to go with black. And on the blue, I chose to go with white. So once you've got your 2 triangles lined up, what a good practice here is to fold your unit in half and then fold these units in half and make a small crease in the folds. You don't have to stretch or anything like that, because remember, there is a lot of bias here, but just make a divot in your triangles so that you can line them up with the fold of your flying geese unit. So then you're going to take and line those up center to center, line this one up center to center, doing the same exact thing with your other color wave if you choose to go that route, center to center, and then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both triangles. And what you should end up after that is you should end up with a couple of blocks that look like that. The next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and add our left and right triangles. For my blue units on the left and right sides, I chose to use prints that had a white background. I'm going to do the same thing. I had a crease here and a crease here, but I also have a crease here and a crease on this one. And you would just line up those divots, right sides together, like so, sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down. And if your sewing and your cutting is accurate, when you start here where these 2 pieces intersect, you should also end where these 2 pieces intersect, and it should be 1/4 inch. And once you've done attaching the sides, then you should end up with a unit that looks like this. So let's see what our quilt blocks look like in a row. So I have one row already put together, and we're laying out the next row. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our flying geese units look like they're all chasing each other. And you're going to build basically 2 rows. You're going to have one row where the flying geese in one color go upward and to the right, and the flying geese in the other color go downward and to the right. Then the next row that you'll make is where your flying geese go upward in one color to the left, and the opposite color, your flying geese, will go downward and to the left. Those are the only 2 rows that you need. With the 48 blocks that you'll make, it'll be 6 blocks wide and 8 blocks in length. When you're pressing your rows after they're put together, make sure that you take the time to pay attention to how you're pressing the seams. Choose which row you're going to press the seams to the left and which row you're going to press the seams to the right. This will allow your seams to nest where there is bulk, and where we have seams that meet in these heavier places, that your bulk is kept to a minimum. All right, so let's go ahead and get these rows put together. So here I have the most of my blocks put together, and all I'm getting ready now to do is to attach the top half to the bottom half, and I wanted to just kind of share a couple of things. So we often talk about how when you cut a block or cut a unit on the diagonal, it creates something like a stretchy bias, right? And so when we look at this piece right here as an example, if I tug on it a little bit, it has no give to it. But when I go to pull it this way, you can see that it stretches. So squaring these up to make sure that they were all the same size was a bit of a challenge. So now I have the 2 halves pinned together, and I've pinned at 2 basic points within each block. I've pinned at the lower edge or upper edge of the block unit where the flying geese are. Also matched up my intersects where the 2 blocks come together. so that the seams are nesting and will reduce that bulk. So what does nesting seams look like? So when we talk about nesting seams, on this set of seams here, we can see that the joining seam is pressed to my left. And on the underside, the joining seam is pressed towards my right. So if I were to unravel or untighten the seams, it looks like a little paddle system, right? We want to make sure that where the seams meet, we want to make sure that they're as close together as possible. And so we can open up our seam and we can see the seam here for this block and then the seam here for this block. We want to make sure that our seams are lining up, kissing cousins, side by side. And these nesting seams will also help prevent some of your points from being lost. So here we have where our flying geese come together point to point. And if you notice, right here I can see my stitch lines create a little X intersection right there. It's going to look the same on the opposite side where this stitch line and this stitch line come together and they make an intersect right there. So what we want to do here in this case, so when I'm matching these two peaks together, I'm going to stick a pin right through that intersect, right? And so that pin is coming out right at the very tip of that peak. In order to make sure that it matches up, I'm going to take and poke this pin right through the very tip of this peak, the opposing peak on the other half. Then, once I've got it together like that, I want it to be very horizontal. I don't want it to be that way or that way. I want it to be horizontal. So once I have this pin in there nice and firm and it's horizontal, I'm going to grip right below that and I'm going to get my next pin and I'm going to take and as best as I can make that pin come out right as close to that pin. So what that does is that helps keep your peaks matched up. If you put your pin in through the two pieces and then you shift it one way or the other, that will cause your fabric also to shift. All right, so now that I've got everything pinned, I'm going to go ahead and get this to the sewing machine and put the two quilt top halves together. All right, now before I go and step away and call this done, I always want to make sure that I have checked for pins that I might have left in or forgotten to pull out as I was stitching by. All right, so now we are done putting our quilt top together. So there's the quilt top finished. Now it's time to go ahead and think about some borders to put on it. I'm actually going to do a double border. The reason why is that a lot of these prints are very, very busy and I want to bring out the black more than anything else. And I think the pink tends to draw, to detract the eye away from the flying geese pattern. I tried a couple different colors. One color I thought would be nice was this gradient maroon, because I think it would bring out a lot of the darker portions of it within the flowers and stuff like that. But this is a gift for my son and my daughter-in-law so I didn't want it to be too feminine. And so I thought, okay, I need to bring out the black more than I need to bring out the pink. So I think what I'm doing is, I like the idea of this. Still, yes, there's a lot of purple and pink. So I think having this darker first stage border will bring out the black a little bit more. To bring out the greens and the blues, I have a nice green low tone print. I think that will work well. So I think this is what I'm going to do here for the two borders. And then I'm going to add, it's mostly a really dark purple color with little green accents. And I think this will make for a really super nice binding. We are done. Do one final check for pins, and the quilt top itself is now finished. So the quilt backing, it needs to be 70 by 84. So it's going to take roughly 4 yards of fabric, and I'm actually piecing it together. So what I've done here is I've taken leftover fabric that I thought I was going to use for border, but it turned out to be that maybe it would have made the border a bit too busy. So I'm using this for the backing, and I've got 2 lengths of the fabric, each at 70 inches. So my seams are going to be horizontal on the quilt instead of vertical. So all I'm doing here is, with both of these 2 fabrics, I'm matching them up together, and unfolded and pieced together, they'll be about 84 inches wide. So I'll have my 84 by 70. And I'm basically sewing my selvage edges together, and I'm going to give it at least about an inch inside of the seam allowance. And I've already pressed the fabrics. I'm going to make sure that the seam does not include the selvage. So when you, if you use this here and you sew right along where that selvage is, the stitching or the density is a bit tighter. And if you were to use that inside of your seam allowance, then when you go to wash the quilt, it would shrink up more than the regular working area of your fabric. So we'll give it about an inch, and then we'll go ahead and cut off the selvage. Backing is pieced. Might not look pretty, but it's on the underside, so it's all right. I thought I'd share a little bit of details on the sandwich making process. So for the batting on this, I'm using the Pellon All Naturals Cotton batting. It's a little bit thicker of a loft of batting, and it just makes that quilt just a little bit heavier and keeps you just a little bit warmer. Next, I'm going to be rolling each component up on its own pool noodle. So the widest component is the backing, and it is 70 inches wide. So I have my backing. I'm going to lay it out right side face down. So it's going to get rolled up on one pool noodle. Then I have the back batting, and the batting is going to get rolled up on one pool noodle. And then I have the quilt top itself. That'll get rolled up. I'll lay it out right side up. That will go on another pool noodle. And then I'm going to try this Quilter Select Free Fuse. It's a semi-permanent fusible powder. I've seen this in a couple of videos, and I thought I would give it a try. It's another option for those of you that don't like to utilize an aerosol glue product. I'm not affiliated in any way or any form with any of the products that I use. It's just a way of sharing what another quilter uses to give people options who maybe don't know about the different products. I'm also going to continue to use my pins. So these are pins that have a slight bend in them, and that bend makes it really nice. So when you're piercing through the fabric, and it will cradle up, making it much easier to close the pin. So we're now at the point where we're able to quilt this. I've already done quite a bit of machine quilting already. I'm using embroidery in the hoop method. Some people call it end-to-end quilting or edge-to-edge quilting. I don't know if there is a difference between the terminology. I like the idea of using the machine quilting functionality. The one thing that I do know is that it does tend to take a little bit longer than if I was to move the quilt around at a pace doing free motion quilting and my hands are doing the work and controlling everything. I am doing a small leaf pattern that kind of matches the border here. The other thing that I'm using, oh my goodness, I did most of this quilt in the hoop using a 6x10 hoop frame. It was much harder to get the quilt in and out of the hoop, get everything lined up to make sure that my quilting stencils line up so that it looks like a continuous design throughout the quilt. So what I do have here in place of the hoop is I was able to find a 10x6 monster magnetic hoop from Dime, and I really like it. So I am just going to go ahead and get this hooped up. All right. There are lots of videos on how to do the machine quilting, how to hoop it with a magnetic hoop. I'll just leverage my sewing machine so that I can align the quilt up. I'll take and place my template design down here so that the start point matches up with the end point of the design previously. Some people like to use a sticky type of paper that you can print your templates on. Right now, all I'm doing when I secure the design or the template down, I'm using basically a safety pin. I'm pinning the template in place in 2 spots. I just need it to hold long enough for me to line everything up. Instead of using the small basting pins that I use when I'm basting my quilt, I have a much larger safety pin with that very convenient curve in it. So I will just pin that in place just long enough for me to get my hoop back onto it. And it's a narrow design, so I've got it to where I don't go over, the quilting foot does not go over the over this part right here. Then also I'll take the center of my design, right smack in the center where all of the crosshairs are. I'll maneuver the quilt, I'll hold this in place, and I'll take and I'll center these crosshairs in my template right under the needle and presser foot. I will also drop that presser foot just so I can see a good clear sight picture of the presser foot and where all of those lines come together. I put it smack in the middle of the foot. So here, instead of constantly unhooping and hooping and repressing in a regular hoop frame, all that you have to do here is do some gentle tugging so that your quilt is straight and flat. Everything is straight. Now I've got the template where it needs to be, so I just simply unpin the template, pull it out from under the presser foot, get my tails in order, green light go. All right, so now the one thing you want to make sure is when you're doing machine quilting, I made this mistake. I started in Press Go and I decided I would go look at something on the computer. Not good. I've ripped out a few stitches. So while my hands may not be holding everything, I am still observing the needle and the embroidery process. So I'm going to finish quilting this up. All right, we are done. Hooray! Well, not quite all the way done, but we're done with the majority of the embroidery. I had a lot of issues learning to use the hoop and the machine embroidery. So I do have quite a few skipped stitches that on the quilt top that I'm going to go in and manually fix. So once that's done, then we'll be ready to go ahead and square the quilt up and apply the binding. Right. All right. So I'm just taking it a couple of inches at a time as I finish up the front side. Right. All right, we trim our threads. And we have one other small thing to do with this quilt, and that is to put on a label. I've got my label partially on already. I attached it, two sides of it when I put on the binding, and then all I need to do now is do an invisible stitch on these two sides, and then the quilt is done. All right, so I'll see you back here shortly for the full reveal. So this quilt finishes out at 60 by 72 with the borders. And as you can see, there isn't any direction that geese won't fly. I hope you were able to get something out of today's video. And please feel free, go ahead and add comments. What would you do better? What would you do differently? And share those in the comments below. Thank you so much, and may all of your quilting journeys be joyful, one stitch at a time. Mimi, Mimi, come on, come on, scooch, scooch. I'm trying to put my backing together. Come on, hop down, hop down, hop down, hop down, hop down. I need 4 pieces, 33 by 40, to piece together of my batting. Scooch. No, the whole way.